This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Content Marketing World, the world's premier content marketing event. Find out more at contentmarketingworld.com today. Use the offer code BeanCast. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 549. Sales Always Wins. For Monday, July 1st, 2019. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob North. Thanks for joining us. Many brands are ditching their chief marketing officer for a chief growth officer, consolidating sales, marketing, product, and more under a single head. The idea is to tie marketing more directly to the bottom line, but is it a smart move? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, whether cloud kitchens threaten local eateries, the danger of data moats, why 2 weeks' notice is a thing of the past, plus the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with a marketing strategy and innovation consultant who has a Scottish heart of gold. Ms. Rose Cameron is here. Hi, Rose.
Greetings, Bob. You've missed me, haven't you?
I have. I always do. Now, also with us, we have a Chief Humanity Officer consulting with organizations to generate better outcomes for mergers and acquisitions, Ms. Jennifer Fondrevay. Jennifer, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Hello.
Now, next up, she's our go-to data and analytics expert, our newly minted go-to data and analytics expert, the founder of Quantent Marketing, Ms. Tamara Gaffney. Tamara, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me again. It's good to be here.
And finally, he's digital transformation lead for the Campbell Soup Company. Mr. Sam Monnie is here.
Hey, Bob. Thanks for having me. Thanks for my fans for demanding me back on the show. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
can I do mine over again?
You can do it over as many times as you want, but maybe on another program. So let's get into the topics right away. First up, the trend du jour in executive suites these days is eliminating the chief marketing officer position and replacing it with a hybrid role called the chief growth officer, who oversees both sales and marketing as well as sometimes product and other parts of the value chain. It's an interesting take, Sam. There's obviously some advantages in bringing the sales and marketing functions closer together, but is there a legitimate concern that the quality of branding and marketing suffers in this model? What's your take on this move toward the chief growth? Let's try that again. Chief growth officer.
Well, the struggle you're having saying it, Bob, is endearing. And as a marketer,
hey, at least I got your name right this time.
Well, yeah, I let that go. So after 5 times, I think you got that right. But in terms of this chief growth officer, I'm giving CMOs 5 years as a lifespan in terms of before that job title goes away, because I think there is a real challenge and a crisis in the marketing space, and work needs to happen. And I think the source material you gave us for this, I think it's kind of a puff piece, and it says, MarTech equals growth, and I'm just not having it. I think there is. Yeah, even though I'm the digital transformation guy, I get a little annoyed when the answer to everything growth is digital stuff. And so for me, it's bigger than that. And I think when you think about the role of a chief growth officer, it's about capabilities, processes, and culture within the organization. And that's all valid. And what I'm seeing is a gap between marketers and marketing leaders stepping up to the plate and owning that responsibility and accountability. So
Okay,
in the
well
C-suite,
let's before
they're
we go.
losing their kudos, and I think they're losing the luster of marketing. People are saying, I'm not sure you deliver growth, so someone else
Hmm.
can do that.
Before we go on the fact that this article was a puff piece, which it is, I'll agree to that
Thank you. I
wholeheartedly.
read it.
But it's just like what it's reporting on is actually a well considered strategy. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily over relying on digital as the solution to everything. You know, from what I read between the lines, when you're making a decision to go to a chief growth officer, what you're doing is you're saying the entire value chain is important, from product development to sourcing, which is a really smart position to take, you know? Now, I mean, it's concerning to me to marry sales and marketing together, because sales will always win and marketing will always suffer, is my take on that.
And Bob, that's what horrifies me about
Yeah.
this whole idea. I
Mm.
read this article and I was like, oh no, no,
Yeah.
no. Basically, all it means is that there's going to be a head of sales, and that's it to me.
Right.
Because they just take over. Sales conquers all in terms of short-term thinking.
And that's the way it is with every company, but mostly because everything about sales is tied to the bottom line, and everything about marketing is about driving leads to the sales organization so that they can, you know, contribute to the bottom line and get all the credit. So, you know, this move toward the bottom line is the concerning factor, is it not?
But
But I think Sam makes a good point, though, in highlighting the fact that marketers, this is being foisted on marketing because CEOs are constantly demanding metrics that prove the value that marketing delivers. So I just see this title as one more way to hold marketers accountable. And I think Sam was making the point earlier, it's marketers needing to step up and own that and demonstrate metrics that quantify what they're delivering already.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the metrics, as I've researched this space, I've actually been researching it for a while, and there's lots of data that supports that you need to do both this brand building, higher funnel stuff, and the lower funnel stuff. There's data, there's metrics, there's proof points, and there are other drivers of value creation that marketers absolutely own. And I think it's the marketer's job to ensure that the CEO and all the other C-suite really get it, and not only educating them, but it's building trust with those stakeholders, building trust with employees, building trust with customers and consumers. And there's lots of ways that lead marketers can do that role. Now, I'm not going to fall on my sword and demand to be called a CMO. If a chief growth officer gets you the gig, then great, but understand that's still a marketing role. And you can still drive product, you can still drive research and development, you can still drive that customer relationship, you can still drive that customer experience. You're driving the top line and the bottom line. And as long as you get the CMO gig and the first thing you do is not to change, bring in a new agency and focus a year on building a new campaign, then I think you're going to be successful. But that's the problem. There's a lot of, I would say, frauds out there who are more general managers in the role of marketing. And I think the other thing behind this article that I really like and we should advocate is, when I call frauds, it's you kind of got to roll your sleeves up and start to master some of this other stuff. So the skill building, the competency building, capabilities. You can't just stand from a distance and orchestrate the work. You need to actually be able to speak the language of data, to speak the language of, tech stacks and all of that stuff, and not just, roll your eyes or shy away from it. I think, what my last point here is that one of the biggest things I'm finding, certainly in the MarTech space, is if you speak to the providers, they'll all say that this stuff is for marketers. But then when you ask them who's buying it, they'll say chief technology officers or data officers. So the CMOs are saying, nah, that's not my stuff. So they're abdicating their responsibility when it comes to part of the work that actually gives you the most data and the most measurable outcomes of marketing. So some of them are kind of doing it to themselves, but I would still, listen, I still am a marketer at heart, and I want the CMO to have the seat at that big table. But that clock is ticking. And unless the practitioners step up, the CEOs and the other folks in the C-suite aren't, they're not coming to save you. So marketers have to save themselves, and that's just the thing I'm seeing.
And Samuel, to your point, I mean, we've all been in situations where we've heard the marketing person say, well, I can't get sales to do this and I can't get them to do that, and et cetera, because of the silos of this organization. And my thinking is, how many times are they going to make the CMO this growth officer, and then at the end of the day have this epiphany and say, actually, our head of sales should be the guy.
Right.
Who is the chief growth officer. He'll be the one in charge now. And they move him over there, and suddenly it's all good, but the marketing budget absolutely goes through the floor.
And it's not just the
You
market.
make a good point, Rose. I think, Sam, you said it earlier, right? It's the new title du jour, and it'll change again. And I think it's an opportunity for marketers to not just embrace it, but own it. Define the metrics that they want to deliver on, so that they get credit for the work that they're doing. Otherwise, Rose, to your point, it'll pass off to sales. I think it's an opportunity for marketing to grab onto it and then define how they're delivering on those metrics.
I like that. I like that approach. I mean, I like the idea of grabbing hold of it, because I think that the concept of a chief growth officer is a good one, in the sense that, again, all things about the product, from the concept to the sourcing to the customer service, everything is part of the marketing value chain. And if you don't own the entire value chain, you're losing out with the customer in the end. You're not creating a good experience overall. Tamara, you were going to say something. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, yeah, it's okay. I really am concerned that growth is being translated as, revenue, quarterly revenue, instead of what you just said, which I totally agree with, is all the things related to customer experience and bringing all of that together. And what I see happening way too often is a focus on demand generation or new customer acquisition in the marketing department. And we need to see a lot more pivoting over to the loyalty, retention. How do people feel about your business? And that's what marketers should be doing more of, and that's different from what sales is trying to do on a short-term basis.
There was an article.
If you can do it all, great, but I just worry, because as soon as you try and combine sales and marketing, and I've seen it so many times, it just becomes very short-term.
There was an article that I posted on the Flipboard about the loyalty factor and how loyalty is going through the floor. Customers are less brand loyal, like only 8% are saying that they'd be brand loyal going forward. And there was some study going on out of University of Pennsylvania at the Wharton School that kind of showed that it was a waste of money to start doing loyalty, and that customers are just not inherently going to be loyal. Eventually, everybody goes through attrition. They'll eventually attrite from your brand. So
I don't know. Tell that to Apple and Amazon right now. They seem to have figured it out.
Yeah, and tell that to Starbucks, who's keep attributing revenue growth and profitable revenue growth to their loyalty scheme. So there's lots of data that supports that there's an affinity in a relationship. Maybe you need to redefine what loyalty means and how you talk about it. It's that people aren't just zombies just picking your brand, and that we'll talk a bit later. That for me, that's why people are blind to private or exclusive private brands and exclusive brands, because people are loyal to a great choice, not necessarily to this red and blue label, this green label that they've always bought. So they still have an affinity with some criteria, and you've got to tap into and understand what that criteria is.
And that comes down to a great product experience. It doesn't come down to a marketing program per se. It always comes down to, I like the coffee, I like the computer, I like the car, and I'm going to keep buying it until I don't like it, and then I'm not going to buy it. So creating false senses of loyalty through points programs or whatever, these convoluted methodologies that we use to create loyalty really don't have any impact as much as the product has the impact in terms of loyalty. What kind of experience you have with it, that's what generates the ongoing loyalty.
I think loyalty is one definition, one attribute of this whole conversation. But I mentioned earlier this value creation, and I think the biggest challenge that CMOs face is when they get into that C-suite, you've got to fight with a lot of different stakeholders, and the P&L is the biggest issue that you have facing, because the way that profit and losses are defined, there are a lot of drivers of growth that aren't currently in there. And if you're only focused on the volume stuff and shipments and distribution, you're kind of screwed, because you need to talk about volume in terms of online shoppability, non-branded share of voice. You got to make sure you've got engagement measures in your P&L, so your content and your CRM stuff is in that P&L calculation. You got to have advocacy stuff, your brand health, your net promoter. So if you can redefine the P&L and make sure the the CEO and the other C-suite buy in, and you can prove that those drivers are actually driving growth, retention, affinity, propensity to buy, lifetime value. All of those things aren't currently in a lot of P&L. So that for me is, easier said than done, but there is definitely a way to fight to win so that the CMO role, whether again, you're a chief growth officer, influences how you define growth, how you define top and bottom line. And so the stuff that is usually deemed fluffy and brand building is actually factored into what's making you money in 12 months time, 18 months time, because if you only look at the quarter, you're screwed when you're trying to prove your stuff. But if you redefine that P&L, and it's not just a fiscal year defined attribution, just like other benefits that leaders get, they get 2 years and 3 years in terms of performance related payments. So why isn't your marketing contribution, your growth defined just as you define other parts of the business? It's very convenient that the only way we can look at the business is this next quarter. And if you don't deliver in a quarter, it didn't happen. That's BS as far as I'm concerned. And marketers need to win that fight, to argue and to win that argument and bring the other stakeholders along. So it's not going into the C-suite and fighting with everyone, but you're certainly not passive. You're certainly not just buddying up with one or two people. You've got to build alliances across the C-suite to make sure that everyone sees the value of marketing. Okay, soapbox.
And I think Sam makes an excellent point. As a former CMO myself, who now advises in the merger and acquisition space, I'd have to say I was astonished and a bit depressed how little brand value comes into play when deal makers are valuing a company's worth. It's just astonishing to me. And so that's why I made the comment about just grabbing onto metrics and defining as a marketer those metrics, not only that you want to adhere to and be accountable for, but that you get credit for. Because I always jokingly say, I feel like, the CMOs are the Rodney Dangerfield of the C-suite. No respect.
but you make a great point, though, because there's data out there, because a lot of companies now, and now, it's been very publicly declared, Kraft have written off billions in brand value because apparently, this zero-based budgeting and cutting everything didn't work. So there's data in the market right now, and you can't deny that because that hit the top and bottom line. So guess what? If you're doing it wrong and you're applying these wrong things and you say brand doesn't matter, well, explain the billions that were wiped off big companies. The shareholders, the analysts care about that stuff. So that's
they're starting to, but I got to tell you, it's only because they're seeing what happened with Kraft Heinz. Typically, deal makers have not. They don't regard the brand value as part of the valuation.
And it's tough for them because they're wrong. Now there's proof. It cost you billions. I'm going to use that as evidence. So yes, it's been painful for a number of years. That's why I'm bullish. And that's why I'm going to be more on the front foot than the back foot, because that data says it all. And there are a number of other brands out there kind of feeling a bit of pain and writing off on their P&L. And I think there's going to be more this year because everyone fell into the zero-based budgeting trap, and it was like everyone following each other. So now if brands do matter, you've got a 2-3 year window to prove that marketing works, because if you don't, the CMO role will not exist in C-suite in the next 5 years.
You know what, Bob, Tamara made a good point earlier about the aspect of growth. I mean, everyone should own growth in a company, and giving it to one person may dilute everyone feeling as though they own it. And Tamara, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but that was my takeaway from your comment, and which I agree. Growth should be owned by everyone. If you give one person that title, I don't know, others may take a pass.
I agree with that. But I also think marketing, I agree also that the term marketing is also very limited and not really descriptive of what that role does. So everyone's searching for what that role should be. And I've heard all kinds of different approaches. I don't know that any of them have really stuck yet, but let's experiment. That's the great thing about business. Several different people will come up with a role and they'll try it out. And if it totally sucks, then others won't follow. And maybe that's a good idea to go ahead and call it a chief growth officer and see if that's better.
There's one other thing that came to mind when I was preparing for this story, because you look at the combination of sales and marketing into a single role, and it brings about a certain amount of efficiency. But at the other side of the coin is that you lose that ability to kind of make each other better. As much as sales and marketing hate each other sometimes, and it comes to blows across the boardroom table, I mean, what it comes down to is sales and marketing make each other better. The drive for sales makes marketing have to reach deeper, and the effort to brand makes the salespeople smarter. And if you take those two positions and you combine them together, do you lose something essential in business health?
I don't think so when you think about the real world, certainly in the industry sector I'm in with, which is omnichannel. And so
Mm.
you cannot stick to your traditional way of thinking and working because, there's this darndest thing called the internet. And now that's pulling you in different directions. And actually, there's new tension being created in terms of how you show up in an omni-channel world. But if you then put the consumer at the heart of what you do, you then come back together again. So I think there's lots of other places to fight. So even if you come together, you're still fighting about other things. So don't worry about it. Sales and marketing will always fight because they love each other as frenemies. And I think that's fine. But what are you doing is if you can, you've got to have the same end goal. And just as, the way I was brought up as a marketer is I had to be able to talk intelligently about my top 5 customers. Now you've got to talk about your top 5 customers in an omni-channel world as a marketer. But equally, in the sales function, you've got to be able to talk about brands and why brands matter and how that drives value for your consumer and your customer. So I think there is, yes, the tension will remain. It'll be in a different way, but unifying those roles, I think is a good thing because the enemy is not between sales and marketing. It's outside of the company, and a lot of organizations forget that.
Well, we're going to move on and we're going to talk next about the impact of cloud kitchens. Cloud kitchens are becoming more and more popular through services like Uber Eats, enabling them, but they're also threatening restaurants, local restaurants. We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk a little bit about our sponsor. Content Marketing World is an incredible conference. And I want to get honest here a little bit about this, talk a little bit about what went on behind the scenes, because when they first came to me and started saying, do you want to be involved with the promotion of this event? I was initially just questioning. I wanted to know more about the event. I wanted to know what's involved with it. And it really surprised me how big it is, how important it is, how monumental the insights are that come from it. I mean, the more this conference shaped up, the more impressed I got. I mean, we've talked about the lineup. We've talked about how so many BeanCast guests are actual presenters at this event, but there's also some pretty big names involved too. I mean, Henry Rollins is going to be there. If anybody doesn't know who Henry Rollins is, you really got to get up on your music history because Henry Rollins is an incredible musician and he's done some really groundbreaking work over the years, and he's going to be there. Mindy Kaling's going to be there. I mean, these are not small names. I mean, these are big name people coming to this event. Nearly every major brand globally is going to be at this event as well. And they're expecting nearly 4,000 attendees to be there in Cleveland where this event happens. I mean, this is something pretty important. Content Marketing World is the world's original and largest annual gathering of content marketing professionals, all coming to hear the latest thinking on every topic imaginable about content marketing. And, we've been featuring one Beancaster a week, and this week I want to talk a little bit about Scott Stratton, because Scott has been on our program a number of times. And those of you out there who know about content marketing know that Scott made his fame with his unmarketing book. The idea that you don't need to do everything from a marketing perspective. You need to be real with your customers. You need to create meaningful content and meaningful engagement. And Scott does one of the best presentations. He's one of the best keynoters out there in the business. He's going to be there giving one of his fabulous keynotes. You got to be there to see it. And I've talked again and again about the fact that this content marketing world is starting to look at agencies and starting to get really interested in developing content tracks for you specifically. If you're an agency member out there, if you're a professional in the agency world, you may look at this as being something that just brands go to. But this is something that has a lot of value specifically for agencies. They've got their own agency track. They've got a branded content track. And, they're even bringing out the free booze for you. I mean, they got an agency exclusive cocktail hour. And when they're shipping out free alcohol, this is an event that really cares about you. So they're doing that as well. Plus, don't forget, when you have every major brand globally in attendance and you have over 4,000 attendees, You've got hundreds of new business prospects roaming around the convention hall. Easily hundreds of new business prospects for agencies. This is someplace that you have to be, and you have to decide now because the time is coming up. There really isn't a good excuse for you not to send at least one member of your staff, and I really believe that you should go to this event as well. Now, the dates are September 3rd through the 6th, and Cleveland, Ohio is where it's happening. Don't wait, though. Get it registered today before it gets into August and you start running out of time and you got to decide, well, you're going to get your flights and whether you're going to get a hotel room and all those other concerns that come up with conferences this popular. Get it all handled now. Go to contentmarketingworld.com and use the offer code BeanCast. All caps. You got to do it all caps. Don't know why. Just got to do it. BeanCast. And they'll even knock $100 off your total price if you do it now. That's contentmarketingworld.com, offer code BeanCast. Register today, and I'll be looking for you at this year's event. Well, TechCrunch ran an analysis this past week about the rise of cloud kitchens and their possibly detrimental effect on restaurants. For those of you who don't know what a cloud kitchen is, it's a centralized kitchen that a lot of people in the area who want to put up virtual restaurants can then rent out space and provides a stove and an oven and a sink and all the things you need in a kitchen so that you can run a virtual restaurant. And these restaurants are starting to pop up all over the place, and they're stealing basically revenue, delivery revenue, and actual visit revenue from local restaurants in the process. Now, Rose, the business model here is pretty darn ingenious, especially the ability to quickly and cost-effectively respond to food trends by opening up and closing virtual restaurants on the fly. You know, you got a lot of people ordering Chinese food. You can go and set up a Chinese restaurant. You know, it's just like you have a lot of people ordering pizza. You can open up a pizzeria. But is this truly an existential threat to local restaurants doing something like this? Or is this more like a culling of the herd and only the fittest will survive? What's your take on that?
It's funny because when I first started looking into this, I was like, okay, 10 taco trucks drive into a warehouse. Because, you know, that's kind of how I rationalized it in my head. Here are a lot of people who love to cook, who are really good at it. And this is a cost-effective way for them to have an infrastructure around them to do their thing. Let's be honest, all of the people on this podcast and listening to this podcast have spent many years of our lives in restaurants. And some of them have been amazing, but the majority of them have been meh, right?
Yeah, right.
There are a lot of people who make great food, but they don't necessarily make great experience. And I think that this is an interesting way of, you know, like focusing on the food until such time as you're successful enough to craft the right experience. When I was looking at it, I thought, this is really interesting, especially for those places that extend into other geographies, right? So I've got my flagship restaurant in Cincinnati. I want to do some controlled growth, maybe Detroit, Chicago, etc., but I can't afford those kind of property values. This allows me to branch out to extend in a cost-effective way. I mean, there are a lot of really great things about it that I think will actually strengthen some local restaurants to extend themselves beyond where they were originally from, as well as create new entrepreneurs in this business. But the thing that concerns me is the creation of these kitchens for evil, evil deeds, Bob.
Are you saying these? Are you comparing these to crack labs or something, meth labs?
It's right up there. So, you know, years ago when I was working on McDonald's, I said to them, you know, you need to be concerned about the coffee shops in the petrol stations and the supermarkets. And I remember them not being too chuffed with me when I said that. The realities are, though, that if you have your Dominick's or your Loblaws or wherever you are in the world, they now have an opportunity to open these for themselves and essentially take over the local cooking. it can be done by large corporations. It could be done by the Amazons of this world. So, my concern is that the entrepreneurial chefs still have an opportunity to kind of make their own inroads and not kind of be the slaves to whomever is potentially running those larger, I think of them almost as ag farms.
Yeah, that's the concern that I have with it as well. I mean, this idea that Amazon could get into this business really super easily, and suddenly they're just opening and closing restaurants and optimizing based on the data and completely shutting out any kind of entrepreneur in the area who might have a unique concept but doesn't have the scale and the power and the data to do that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And if you want to go deeper into my sick conspiracy darkened mind, okay, what I'm also seeing is these, if a kitchen has a health scare, the whole thing has to shut down, right?
Yeah.
So, now you're dealing not with one mom and pop, but 20 mom and pops in the same warehouse. Do all of them have to shut down if somebody makes a mistake? So, the adherence to security, to food security, to cleanliness, etc., has to be adopted across all of these individual units. And I look at that and I go, that's going to be where the scary bit happens.
To a certain extent. I mean, this kind of model exists in the real world as well. You've got the farmer market model where you have a whole bunch of restaurants combined into one little area, or the food court model. And it doesn't mean that everybody shuts down when one has a problem. I mean,
but they're not all preparing their food in the same space. And from what I've seen, these are kind of open plan situations, right? So we said it here first. People just watch and learn, and we'll see what happens.
I'm taking notes.
Cue the eerie music in the corner. There you go.
When I was reading and listening to you, Rose, and thinking about this is essentially private label or exclusive brands coming into this marketplace.
Hallelujah.
And so branding matters, right? And yes, Amazon could come in, but guess what? They're doing that everywhere else. So now the challenge is if you have to have a strong enough proposition to win in the marketplace. But yes, there is a very real threat, just like in food and sports, all the other industries that have been infiltrated by private and exclusive brands. This is the same thing happening. And is it such a bad thing? Because at the end of the day, if I'm thinking about my Grubhub experience, I know we'll maybe talk about them a bit later, but when I'm thinking about them, I'm looking for a solution to an immediate need. I'm not necessarily wanting to go out and have this brand experience in a physical restaurant. So it gives those players, those organizations, the Amazons or the Grubhubs of this world, an opportunity to build their margins, build their relationships through the data. It's just business. And I think as a consumer, all you want is a great experience. So yes, there's a dark side, there's risk in terms of the food preparation, because you're never sure, is this a real place? But really, the decision-making process for this stuff is online anyway. So you're not looking for you're not going to the physical place when you're ordering food online most of the time. You're looking at visual images, you're looking at Google, you're looking at those platforms anyway. So we're still making decisions without having that physical piece. So I don't think I think this is a good thing in terms of the opportunities, as long as there's a good way of connecting with your consumers. And again, this just comes back for me to building great brands, building great propositions, and doing the work of connecting with people and getting them to choose you over choosing something else.
I think this is just like Kiln or WeWork. It's kind of like an incubator. And the other positive side to this could be that new chefs come out of it, that they get picked up by bigger restaurants, and it adds to the ability for the restaurant scene to be ever growing and innovating and really bringing along something new that they wouldn't have had a chance to see before. So I think if you look at it one way, it could really strengthen the restaurant business with the new influx of innovation and great new chefs.
And you can totally see the Food Network saying, oh, we're going to move in with Cloud Kitchen for 2 years and just film the madness.
Absolutely.
And I think, Rose, you make an excellent point about the experience piece of it, because I'd have to say this research, this article kind of depressed me, the decreasing number of people going to restaurants and people doing takeout. And I feel like we're losing our sense of experience that you have from a restaurant. So if this helps foster that in some way in terms of the focus on the experience and what restaurants are supposed to offer. I guess I always look at, well, something's got to improve in the restaurant aspect for this not to take over. And I think you make a good point.
And that's what I like most about this. I mean, the one positive I pulled from this is it seems like it's a challenge to local restaurants to make a better case for dining out. I mean, basically,
because there's going to be always that occasion where you want to go out in public display with another individual or group of individuals and celebrate over food. That occasion will always be there. I don't think we're all going to become a bunch of shut-ins, 24/7. God, I hope not. So, there's always going to be those two discrete different types of approaches to food. And let's just make sure that we've got some great experiences out there so not everybody is gorging on Pizza Hut and Haagen-Dazs ice cream at 11 o'clock at night.
And, the thing that we need
Not speaking from personal experience,
I was
right?
going to say, there was a lot of emotion in that. That felt very real somehow.
Not at all. Not at all.
I have nothing to add.
I'm suddenly hungry for Haagen-Dazs.
Why don't we move on to the next topic here? The Andreessen Horowitz blog featured a fascinating look at why over-reliance on data moats exposes an organization to a false sense of security. It's a complicated read. I kept starting it and going, oh, am I really going to plow through it? But if I can attempt to summarize what I think is the most salient point, unlike traditional network-based businesses where costs go down the larger the network grows, data network businesses actually get more expensive over time as adding new data with enough relevant value becomes increasingly difficult, challenging, and more cost prohibitive, I guess we would say. So, Tamara, how do you feel about the main points of this article, which really is worth slogging through because it does do a good job of making it, dumbing it down for us who don't deal with data moats to understand it a little bit better. And how big is the risk to business overall from something like this?
This was a really meaty article, not like the fluffy piece we were talking about earlier. With the data moat, just to put it into context, what they're talking about is not something like a data lake. It's really more, how do you create a defensible position using data? And the article went into some detail about how it costs more money the more data you save. So, and I agree with that, but I've had so many occasions where I want to go back in time and look at something. And oftentimes what happens is a company will collect a bunch of data and then they'll just decide that after a certain period of time to dump it. Like 5 years ago, 1 year ago, whatever, we're just going to dump all of our past history. So as an analyst, it's like fingernails on the chalkboard for me. I can't let go of that data, even though it's more expensive, because it has so much value if you know what you're doing with it. Now, they did give some very, very good suggestions about how to save or economize on your data. But I just feel that if data is something that you can make money off of, or even if it's something that you can use as a part of marketing, which is not to plug, content, but that's what content means. It's taking data and using it to create content for marketing purposes. And a lot of companies are doing that nowadays. And if they left their data on the cutting room floor, they couldn't do that anymore.
One of the things that just struck me about this article was that they weren't going against using data. I mean, they actually were very bullish on making data a key part of your business. It's just the over-reliance on this data mode as being the key driver of protecting your business. And for me, that's what rung so true when I was reading through this, was this idea that if we over-rely on data, we end up in a bad place because our data makes our business more and more expensive. It's expensive to maintain the data. It's expensive to make sure that it's clean. It's expensive to add more and more relevant data. And, those are good costs to take on. You need to continue to do it. But it's really saying that if you rely entirely on building your data moat, you're actually exposing yourself to risk because you're not taking care of the important things like, loyalty and customer service and excellence in product and all the other things that are necessary to make your business successful. And I think the other point that they made was that businesses that are entirely built around data are in great jeopardy. And that's why Andreessen Horowitz is very kind of loath to invest in data-only businesses. What's your take on that?
I think that any business that thinks it's just data only is fairly year 2000, ish. And there's not a strong business case to just be a data company anymore. There are way too many pressures on data, especially from privacy, security, all the other things that we see in the marketplace, to have an entirely data-oriented revenue model. But having said that, a lot of what I see go on is this push-pull between the people who want to cost optimize and the people who want to keep data so that they can do things with it. They can do more loyalty and retention. They can build models. They can really understand the core mechanics of how a business is changing. And if they dump it all or eliminate all the good stuff because somebody who wants to save a few pennies, and I can give you an example of this. I won't say the name of a company that did this, but I know of a company who just arbitrarily decided to delete every bit of data they had after 1 year, anything that was older than a year, and they just deleted it because they were trying to save $5 million on servers. And I was horrified by that. So that's the challenge.
That seems ridiculous. But it also, I can see that. See, this is why the first topic makes so much sense, because if you're a CMO and you understand this, you could actually step up and say, that's stupid. Let's not do that. And the premise, but the core premise of this is the premise of diminishing returns. And that's consistent with just about any other investment in machinery, in equipment, like depreciation on which run through the P&L. So actually, there's a logic behind it, and I think it's just having strategy. And to your point, the strategy of saving $5 million makes sense, but if it means deleting stuff after a year, that's kind of asinine. And so that isn't a strategy. That feels more like a tactic. And so, for me, my response to this was to link it to the first topic we talked about. And this is a space that the CMO, the marketing people need to think about what the implications are, and actually ensuring that that they have strategies and have it baked into their ways of working and the skills to actually make sure that dumb decisions aren't being made elsewhere, but also a realization that maybe there is a depreciation factor of this data and you can't fully rely on it, but finding great ways to leverage it. And I'm just thinking data, there's a quote from Brené Brown that maybe stories is just data with a soul. Stories are data with a soul. And I just think, wow, there's a lot of data isn't just numbers and quant, it's qual stuff as well. So this whole article perhaps biased to the qualitative, the quant world. But if you think about qualitative data and the richness of that and research and insights and knowledge, that's huge. Imagine throwing away your qual insights from 5 years ago. That would be the stupidest thing in the world for most brands. So
Samuel,
I think
how many meetings have you been in, Samuel, where you bring up the word data and you can literally watch them falling asleep around the table?
Because they think of spreadsheets, yeah.
Yeah,
the story of my life.
I know, I'm sorry, Lovey. I hate to say it in public, but and it is so critically important. And you hear all these people saying, "Oh my gosh, people are looking at my data," and I think to myself all the time, if they only did. If they only knew the value of the data and weren't intimidated by it, which I think a lot of companies are, to the point where they delegate it to the guys in the back room there who are, the 4 data scientist students that you got from the local university who are over here from India for the next 3 years.
Yeah, Rose, you make a great point. My takeaway from the article, it just was a reminder how many companies have enormous amounts of data and they don't know what they have. They've either not asked the right questions or they've just continued to ask data to say that they have it. but don't analyze it and use it. So that was what that article reinforced for
Yeah.
me.
But doesn't that make a case for data cleanliness, though? I mean, like, isn't it like holding a huge liability? This is something that Farah Bostic always brings up, that companies do not need to be sitting on more data than they actually need, because you hold that liability in case of an intrusion about data that you don't even need to be asking for. And so there's so many opportunities to keep your data clean and to delete data that's not necessary anymore. And, but it needs to be done smartly. It can't be just like what Tamara was saying. You have this situation where they just dump all the data before a certain date. That doesn't make any sense. But to clean that data and take away the things, we don't need these email addresses, or we don't need these phone numbers right now. To get rid of those things.
They're looking at immediate returns, right?
Right.
And so when they're saying it's over this amount of years old, do I have to clean it? Well, is it making me any money right now? The reasons they do dig in it and clean it, et cetera, is for security purposes more than anything else these days. So, I see that this ongoing issue with data, you mentioned, Bob, that you use the right data. The knowledge you have to understand what are the right questions to ask, what is the right data to keep, that is an incredible data scientist and analyst, and they are very few and far between in marketing right now.
Well, we're running out of time, so I want to hit this last topic real quick. Finally, there seems to be a growing trend in the agency world, according to Digiday. Employees are quitting without giving the accepted minimum of 2 weeks' notice. There were some really interesting stories here, but this is concerning on a number of reasons, Jennifer, but is it just the natural outcome for an industry that has been enormously callous toward its own loyalty about employees? Can the agency world of all businesses look at the fact that 2 week notices are becoming "I'm quitting tomorrow"? Can they look at that and say this is wrong, considering how poorly they've treated their employees for so long?
Well, it's interesting, and I say this as an ad agency gal for 15 years. I don't see this trend as exclusive to advertising. I think the standard engagement norms between employer and employees are broken just completely, from recruiting to onboarding to engagement, even through to departure. So, as someone who was in advertising, and frankly, yes, did witness or experience some of the, I don't want to say callousness, but I think they could have done better by employees. But I don't see it as exclusive to advertising. The war for talent is just so fierce. My opinion, and I will say it's informed by the work I'm doing in mergers and acquisitions now. The lack of 2 week notice is because employees are being constantly wooed because of the war for talent, and younger employees, which this article pointed out, it's traditionally younger employees, 3 to 6 years experience in advertising. They're in hot jobs, so that's digital, social content, and they're constantly being wooed. And I would say they grew up in an era where their parents had that contract, had that loyalty to their employer, and got screwed, for lack of a better description. They weren't well treated, particularly in the 80s, where you had leveraged buyouts starting to happen and massive layoffs to drive efficiency. So I think that, in my opinion, is what's driving this across the board. The lack of 2 week notice is because they don't feel a loyalty to employers anymore, and are just thinking in the short term. And that's always been the case, unfortunately, in advertising. I remember when I was in it, you were often encouraged by your other colleagues to say, hey, if you want to increase your salary, you got to keep jumping around. So that part hasn't changed, but I do think it's important to note this is not exclusive to advertising. The norms for employer-employee engagement have changed dramatically, and I'd say it's a result of what younger employees saw their parents go through. Is my initial takeaway from everything I've read around this.
You
I've
know,
actually read some data on this, and it's really coming now from what we call the Gen Z, which just entered the workforce, and they're starting to become a factor. This is the youngest generation,
Right.
and what's going on with this generation is that they have been used to seeing themselves in the center of everything. The front-facing video camera defines them. And the reality is that I don't think they will ever be loyal to a particular anything. And this goes back to the conversation we were having about brand. They are much more about me than they are about belonging to something like a company. And I've seen that these folks will quit on a day's notice and not even have another job, but go off to do something that they want to do, like hiking or go on a trip somewhere. And I think that we may see a generational shift, and this might be one of the markers of it.
It's interesting. I hadn't seen that, meaning that they would quit without a job. Your point makes sense. The research that I've done is they don't see a need for loyalty because what they saw older generations go through in that employer-employee contract.
Yeah, I think there's that, and there's this, with the shift to this gig economy, and that being in the favor of employers, and you've seen the Lyfts and Ubers, and a lot of companies go through some employee relations issues because there isn't that loyalty coming for the other way. And probably everyone on this call has sort of been through the job search process, and you've not heard from a company ever, you didn't get a no or anything. So employers ghosting people has always been the norm, but they got away with it. And now the shoe's on the other foot. It's like, oh no, this is so bad. Because when I looked at the article, I was thinking, who are the HR folks in this? Are they like in touch with the real world? It's almost like we're perfect, but these bad 20-somethings are quitting. There's a story the other day I saw, which I've seen a few sources, so I'm assuming it's true, but a man, it was obviously a Brit, a guy from Sheffield, sent a sorry for your loss card to their boss when they quit their job, as the approach, and they found it funny. So and so I'm playing to this Gen Z. The Gen Z, how do they see the world, and how does the world see them? And the world of work is changing. We all know that. Yep. So I think and companies often don't do a good job. You talked about onboarding and exit interviews and staying in touch with their employees, and so. In the world that we live in today, that respect that perhaps the boomers perceive it as is almost irrelevant to the Gen Z. It's like, you want me to respect you when you treat me like this, or when you don't even know my name? So I think there's a realization there's a reality being injected to this. I'm not saying I would behave in the same way, but listen, I'm British. And at my level, we would get 3 months notice. 3 months was the standard. So to come to America and someone being able to say, listen, I'm out, deuces, throw the laptop at their boss and walk out the door is actually real. So I was in culture shock for a good couple of years when I started working here. I couldn't believe you could give 1 week's notice and get away with it. But that's the reality of the American labor laws. So it's kind of normal, right?
Yeah, and Sam, think about this. The same people who are saying, forget you when it comes to my fortnight notice, right, are the same people that you ask to work through their holidays and then not have them pass over into the next year. So as far as they're concerned, you owe them that 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this goes back down to, everybody who listens to this show knows that I'm a big fan of operational branding. And I think that when your employees are this dissatisfied or this unloyal, what you're doing is you're harming your brand loyalty. You're harming your brand as a whole. You're not just, you don't have an HR problem, you have a real brand problem. And that's concerning. Well, it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Rose Cameron. You can find her on LinkedIn because she still has no website from what I know. Am I right about that?
Ouch. Oh, Bob.
I have bigger and better things to do. And I'll talk later, okay, lovey? I'm sure you can just whip that up in the background. Anyhow. What I am talking about today is I'm going to make an offer to your base, Bob. I'm currently working with Martin Lindstrom on his next book. And it's called the Ministry of Common Sense. And right now we are collecting stories of stupidity and common sense answers to them that have happened in the corporate world during your lifetime and in your direct experience. We will not attribute them to you or to the specific brand, but I've heard so many, I can't even begin. So I'm at Cameron@martinlindstrom.com. If anyone wants to say, hey, do I have one to share with you? That's how you can get in touch with me.
That sounds like a fantastic project. And yeah, there's just the opportunity to interact with Rose. I mean, you can hear her. You know what she's like. This is a great opportunity to actually talk to the woman. So definitely get involved with this. Next up, we have Jennifer Fondrevay. You can find her at jenniferjfondrevay.com. I will have the link in the show notes so we don't have to spell her name right now. Tell us what's going on in your world, Jennifer. What would you like to promote?
So I've got a survivor's handbook. It's called Now What? How to Survive, a survivor's handbook for thriving through acquisition. Completely suddenly spaced on the name of my book, but it's coming out at the end of September. I think I've lived it for so long, I just spaced it. But it is a handbook specifically for how I like to frame it as those people who aren't in the room when the deal is made, but who are burdened with the execution, which is millions and millions of people. And given the fact that the last 5 years we've had over $3.5 trillion worth of deals done globally, I think there's a lot of people who could benefit from the book. And so, Bob, I'd be happy if people want to go to my website and say they heard about the book from BeanCast, would be happy to make sure that they get a copy of the book the moment it comes out. So if you go to my website and just highlight where you heard about it, I will make sure you get a copy of the book.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And definitely, Jennifer's a wonderful person. I mean, it's just like I met her at a C-suite event, and it was just instant karma. We were having like a simpatico on the same thing. So it was really awesome. So I definitely recommend you pick up her book.
And this is before I even knew you had all these friends.
Before you ever met all my smart people to make me look smarter. Tamara Gaffney, you can find her at quantentmarketing.com. That's the home of Quantent Marketing, her consultancy that deals with data and analytics. You heard what she had to offer when it came to the data subject. It blew us all away. We had no, there were a couple points where we're like, what did we say now? So
I
tell us.
jumped the room. Yeah, I if you have all that data and you think you should just delete it because you don't know what to do with it, please call me.
Please don't delete.
Please don't. And please don't put it into a dashboard that no one ever looks at, because we can make data into stories, we can make data into predictions and trends and insights, and we can do things that your C-suite actually will make a decision off of. So please call me if you need help with your data.
Tomorrow we met each other at the Adobe conference, and it was that was another interesting conversation. I mean, we hit it off right away. So I definitely recommend anything that Tamara is doing. You got to find out. You got to get in touch with her. You got to work with her. Last but not least, Sam Monnie. You can find him at the Campbell's Soup Company, or campbells.com. Tell us what's going on in your world, Sam. What would you like to promote?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter at Samuel Monnie, one name, Samuel Monnie. But Bob, I've got a revelation to reveal live for the first time, exclusive news. Now, don't get threatened, but there is another podcast coming to the universe, because we all need another podcast in our life. So I'm working on a marketing transformation podcast with a buddy of mine called Chris Lawson. It's called Marketing Transformation Across the Pond. Because we're a Brit in America and a Brit based in the UK, and we're going to be talking about our different paths and how we think about transformation, the culture of transformation and innovation, tips and tricks to do it faster, and marketing superpowers and how to unleash them. So we're going to be talking about a lot of great stuff coming probably end of summer, but we're working feverishly away on that podcast. So look out for that coming soon, in addition to, of course, keeping the BeanCast number one, a healthy number two competitor. I think you'd agree, Bob. That would be appreciated, surely.
Oh, I'm totally looking forward to this. I think you'd do great as a podcast host. So definitely look for that. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can find out how to advertise on the program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, the good. I like this, Sam. McDonald's Sweden is running a really innovative program perfectly timed for summer. It's basically blanket delivery. They're giving away special blankets via social channels to get word of mouth generated. And these blankets are designed for outdoor use at parks, but they have a QR code on them. So when you get hungry, you simply scan a QR code on the blanket. Your geographic location is sent to a delivery service of your choice. They work with all the major ones like Uber Eats, etc. And they work with McDelivery to process your orders. Then the McDonald's location closest to you prepares the order, and suddenly you got yourself a fast food on a blanket. I like the timing of this. I like the use of technology. I like how they're solving a problem for people who are not at a physical address. It's really super interesting to me. The only thing that I don't like about it is that it's McDonald's and not something that I would actually eat.
Well, you see, Bob, that was going to be my call. My plea is Samuel Adams, the Yards Brewing Company, or Buffalo Wild Wings. This is your moment. The world is waiting for you to offer the same thing, because I want beer or wings. Those are the two options. So I love burgers, but beer or wings, bring it to me with QR code on a blanket. I'm there waiting. The market is huge. Go for it, guys.
No, I love that idea. An idea I didn't love so much was the Grubhub apparently registered over 23,000 website domains, many of them incorporating names of restaurants around the country. Now, Jennifer, they claim that they were doing it as a service for their listing partners, but we all know domain squatting when we see it. So I'm sitting there going, you registered the names of all the restaurants that you're representing, and now you're suddenly claiming that you were doing it as a service to them? That doesn't sound right to me.
Yeah, it did sound sketchy, and even in the article in particular that they had ceased to offer this as a service. So I'm with you. To me, that was not in good form as a partner to restaurants, but I'd have to confess, I was curious to read more about it, because it didn't even seem that the restaurants were aware that this was happening.
Yeah, I have this picture in my mind, Bob, of this meeting where they go, yeah, we're going to be really relevant to all these restaurants that don't have any websites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And whenever you say in an interview, yes, well, we've stopped doing that.
Yeah, the kids would say shady AF hashtag. I think hashtag shady AF.
I think that's exactly what they would say.
I'm in touch with Gen Z. Thank you very much.
You're hip. I understand. Well, the ugly of the week, and I'm going to give this one to Tamara. In addition to blocking ads, AdBlock Plus, the popular ad blocking software, apparently also has a security hole that allows bad actors to execute malicious code on computers that are running this. Now, the maker of the software was totally unaware of the problem until it was publicly disclosed last week. This has got to be your worst nightmare as running a data company.
Well, it feels like something that someone who doesn't like the ad blockers would do, right? Is to go hire a hacker to go figure out how to make the ad blocker look bad.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Yeah, so I actually think that anyone who works in the world of data is going to find that they have a security hole. It seems like it's almost impossible, even for our biggest government agencies, to avoid having a security hole. I mean, look at the potential for an airliner to have a security hole in a computer system that's flying an airplane, right? So I guess the reality is that this is our reality. But I also think it's really an ironic twist. And if somebody did hire a hacker to figure this out, I guess I have to applaud their ingenuity, because it is just so ironic to read.
It truly fits the category of ugly. Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag #GBU. That's #GBU. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcasts listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.